Hi, I'm Danny Ecker with your Chicago Business Today Midday Report. A report out today from local activist groups Stand Up Chicago and Action Now pushes downtown retailers and restaurants to pay their employees at least $15 an hour, more than the current $8.25 minimum wage and the average hourly wage in the metro area of $9.80. The study uses a mix of federal, regional, and local tax databases to conclude that raising the wages would eventually inject more life into the economy at a minimal cost to companies. Of course, merchants themselves may disagree, with many saying margins are thin as is and raising wages would wipe them away. With more on the report, I'm joined now by its chief author, Elizabeth Parisian of Stand Up Chicago. Elizabeth, on what grounds did you conclude that retailers ought to share the wealth a bit more with their employees?
Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, we know that raising wage for retail and restaurant workers from an average of about $9.80 an hour to a minimum of $15 an hour would have a huge positive impact for these workers and their families. There's a multiplier effect of raise that goes into these workers' communities. So what we're seeing in Chicago is a lot of these workers working in the Mag Mile and downtown areas, and then they go back home from work to these incredibly impoverished neighborhoods that are plagued with violence and under-resourced schools. So we found that if the retail and restaurant workers in downtown Chicago were to get a raise to $15 an hour, it would put more than $179 million extra dollars into their communities every year. Not only can these employers afford to give their workers a raise, but they will actually benefit from doing so. And it's kind of the Henry Ford philosophy. You want to pay your workers enough so that they can be patrons and they can afford your services and products.
Right. Of course, there are some who challenge that. I mean, they say raising wages for many of these companies would eat too much into their margins. Are there specific sectors where $15 a minimum wage just makes more sense than others? Are you saying it should be across the board here?
It's merited across the board. When we looked at the 50 largest publicly traded companies in the Mag Mile downtown area, what we found is that these companies are doing extraordinarily well. And they didn't just weather the recession. In a lot of cases, these companies became profitable beyond their wildest dreams after the recession, and we're seeing a huge disconnect between recovery for the retail and restaurant industry and recovery for workers, which simply hasn't happened. In fact, we've created more low-wage jobs since the recession. We've gotten rid of the middle-income jobs and created more low-wage jobs. So I think it's common sense for everyone. America does better when our middle class is thriving and is growing. And so anything we can do to create middle-class jobs benefits everyone.
Seems to come down to a question of top-down versus middle-out economic growth. We heard plenty of that leading up to the presidential election. There's an argument that extra costs would simply be passed along to consumers, but you're taking issue maybe with the high salaries of company executives as much as the current pay of employees, right?
Look, if these companies had made the choice, the very reasonable choice, for example, to do a yearly cost of living increase, to keep wages on par with inflation, which is common sense for your workers, if they had made that decision, they might not be in the position where they are now, where we're seeing all across the country. We've got fast food workers organizing and going on strike in New York City. We've had the Walmart workers here and across the country going on strike. We've got a brand new union here in Chicago of retail and restaurant workers. It shouldn't be a surprise that workers are finally standing up and saying we can't live on these wages, and they can't.
Okay, Elizabeth, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much.